This is Codex Machina, a podcast where we discuss reading, publishing, and all things books. In 1953, Mrs. Thomas J. White of the Indiana Textbook Commission called for a ban of Robin Hood for promoting communism because he stole from the rich and gave to the poor, because that's communism, obviously. 5 students at the University of Indiana, led by Bernard Bray, decided to go get sacks full of chicken feathers, dye them green, and spread them throughout the campus to protest this potential censorship. The students were investigated by the FBI and disparaged by the local paper, and the university would not grant their organization official status. However, the movement spread to other college campuses, and the Green Feather movement would mark a point of college protestation over censorship that hopefully continues today. And when he was asked why attempts to censor Robin Hood pushed him to action, Bray explained that the issue wasn't Robin Hood as much as, quote, a great opportunity to find a symbol to fight McCarthyism. It was more a matter of principle.
So, with that introduction, welcome to another episode of Codex Machina. Today, what we're going to be talking about is the documentary, The Librarians, put on by PBS. Some of the topics that came up for us for further research while we watched the documentary. As a quick warning, at the top of the episode, due to the nature of school book bans and the rhetoric around them, we are going to discuss non-graphically some terms like pedophile, groomer, child sexual abuse material. We will do our best to keep these classy, but in case these are topics that you find triggering, just know that at the start of the episode. We also have a guest here with us today. Erin, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Erin. I studied library and information sciences, and I currently work as a volunteer at a local small community library, and I have, therefore, an interest in this topic.
It's great to have somebody who actually knows the ins and outs of how a library works with us, because Laura and I definitely don't know that.
Definitely not. I just go, check out books, and I'm happy and thankful that libraries exist. So
Libraries are great places.
they are. They're wonderful places.
And I just read a little article written about a study that recently came out that basically proved libraries are perfect and wonderful. Like all these statistics about people being happier about the future, about wanting to learn. Like 80% or something of people who go to the library feel more hopeful about the future. And like slammed through this.
Yeah, that's the thing. But that's also why access to information is dangerous, isn't it? We don't want people hopeful when we're trying to take over the world, do we? No, we don't. But I also just read a story that there's a library, I don't remember where now, that is accepting cat pictures instead of payment for fines. So that's kind of a cute.
Oh, so if you return your book late and you don't want to give them the $1 fee, you could give them a picture of your cat.
So
well, that tells you at least something about who librarians are.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, I think librarians have some of the hottest TikTok and Instagram accounts lately. They do some really fun things on their feeds.
And I think that kind of leads us into talking about the documentary, The Librarians, because it's kind of about the controversy of school book bans, but what it really was about was humanizing the librarians who are being demonized during this process. We watched it all together, and I would love to know what you guys think about the documentary. Did you think it did a good job of talking about the issue?
I mean, I think so. exactly what you just said about humanizing the librarians. It showed what a few librarians in particular were going through in their personal lives as a result of some of these book challenges in the school libraries. And one librarian was really afraid for her own safety. And I think she said that a relative slept on her porch at night because she had received several death threats, and she had to watch where she parked when she went grocery shopping. And I mean, it seems pretty ridiculous that a librarian, somebody who loves books and sharing books with others and organizing, because that's a big part of being a librarian, is that afraid that somebody's going to actually make good on a death threat because they have a book in the library that the person does not agree with. And I think something else that was really good about the documentary is they showed that this organization, Moms for Liberty, they've gone beyond just challenging one book in one particular library because a local parent has a problem with this book being shared with their child, to starting a movement providing materials and direction for people to challenge books in all libraries, even when nobody locally had an issue. And there were a couple parents at one of these challenge meetings that were really against these members of this group because they said, you don't have any students here. You are making choices that affect my child because you have some problem morally with something, and where do you feel the right to do that? So, I thought those were some really good things that the documentary shared.
And I think it wasn't just about that. It was the fact that Moms for Liberty and other organizations are kind of promoting people to run for school boards. They're giving them money. They're trying to take over all of these organizations that do have power over the libraries and schools and what happens there. And I think, to me, that was particularly shocking, just the amount of money and effort that's put into it by kind of more right-wing leaning companies to make sure the school board is fitted with their people, so to speak. I felt that was interesting. I think the one thing the documentary lacked a little bit is I would have liked more examples of what exactly it is that people object to in some of these books. I mean, just because
you're kind of vague about
right.
that. Yeah.
And I mean, just because, And Tango Makes Three is about two male penguins raising a baby penguin. It's like, how is that objectionable? They're animals, so we're just supposed to assume it's that. And I think in a lot of cases, part of it is because I think there was one time when someone at one of these meetings said, what is it exactly that you have an objection to? And no one was answering the question. Because I think in a lot of cases, maybe people haven't actually read the books.
Yeah.
They get on this whole, my God, what's happening to our children train. And
I think that's part of the problem with book challenges and book bans in general, is that there is a very set process for challenging a book. And I'm speaking here more from the perspective of public libraries than for school libraries. But you have to fill out a form with the book, what specific parts of it you want to challenge. So you have to quote from the book. You have to show that you've actually read part of this book and you know why you don't want it in. And it goes then, the head librarian and the board has to check this form and the book and have a meeting about it. There's another more open meeting with the town about it. So it's not a simple, I want all these books removed from all these schools because they're about X. You have to recite specific parts. And something we had been talking about earlier and or when watching this documentary is that it's very different to challenge a specific book versus a theme or a type of group, which very much so seems to be what Moms for Liberty and this Krause list is aiming to do.
Absolutely. Maybe that's a good segue to talk about the Krause list a little bit. So what is the Krause list? It's a politician from Texas, is who Krause is. And he sent a letter to all the schools in his district in Texas that asks them, do you have these books in your library? Basically, he didn't say remove the books. He said, do you have these books in your library? And it was a very weird letter, a very weird list of books. And the librarians who received these letters didn't really understand what to do with what they received. And I looked into it a little bit. Who is Tim Krause? He is the chairman of the Texas House Committee on General Investigating. I don't even know what that means, and I didn't feel like finding out. The action points in his letter were, please identify how many copies of each book in the attached addendum your district possesses, and at what campus locations, including school library and Hazard collections. Please identify the amount of funds spent by your district to acquire the books identified in request number 1 above. Please identify any other books or content in your district, specifying the campus location and funds spent on acquisition, that address or contain the following topics: human sexuality, sexually transmitted diseases, or human immunodeficiency virus, or acquired immune deficiency syndrome, sexually explicit images, graphic presentations of sexual behavior that is in violation of the law, or contain material that might make students feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, or any other form of psychological distress because of their race or sex, or convey that a student, by virtue of their race or sex, is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. Now, you'll notice that that language gets very specific towards the end. Now, I looked into this, and it is very, very obvious that he pulled this language verbatim from a recent House bill. The House bill was number, I think, 3979. Yep. That had been passed recently. And it was some updates to the Texas Education Code. And there is like this subsection H3 2B or whatever, in which they state that as an update to the Education Code, a state agency, school district, or open enrollment charter school may not require or make part of a course the concept that. And then that's where you get this language. An individual should feel discomfort, guilt, anguish, etc. Now, these updates to the Education Code were very much about making sure that students are being taught American history in a way that reflects an accurate understanding of how marginalized groups have been treated in America, to talk about slavery and why it's morally wrong, to talk about how Indigenous persons of America have been treated in the past and why that's morally wrong, things like that. And because of these updates to the Education Code, I kind of see what they were trying to do with this language about making sure students don't feel discomfort or anguish about their identity. But what Krause did was kind of make it, I think, this is my personal feeling, that it became like this white guilt thing. Like, you can't make students feel bad for being white. Because a bunch of the books that he wanted to have removed were books on human rights, books on sex education, books that mention LGBTQ plus people in any way. And obviously that's not about somebody's race, but it's very weird. And I found a journalist on Book Riot named Danica Ellis, who kind of went through the 850 books on the Krause list and kind of grouped them into categories and tried to figure out, where is he getting these book titles from? And it seems like he kind of just ran some kind of keyword search on the school library district and just started listing out books that he thought seemed bad to him. Like, oh, does it talk about pregnancy? That is out. We can't have books that mention pregnancy. But of course, that's only going to catch books that have pregnancy as a keyword in the library listing. It's not very comprehensive, actually. And it's like, it's famously 850 books. it's not actually exactly 850 books. For one thing, because he has the same book listed multiple times, a couple of times, because he clearly didn't put a lot of effort into making this list.
Somebody wasn't thorough.
Yeah, and it's a very weird list. And it seems like he just got a bee in his bonnet, made a list, and was like, okay, let's find out how much public funding has been spent on books that tell children it's okay for them to be gay.
Did you notice if he's got any kind of backing from, like, is he connected to Moms for Liberty? Is there any kind of, did you see if there was anything that kind of prompted him to do this?
Well, the passing of House Bill 3979 is clearly what prompted him to do this, just based on the language and the rhetoric. I did also do some looking into Moms for Liberty, but Moms for Liberty actually got started in Florida.
And there was a similar issue in schools in Florida where they wanted, they said that schools can't teach books and materials that talk about race. Right. That was pretty recent. That was the last couple of years.
Critical race theory, which is hilarious because if you ask any of these people what critical race theory is, they have no idea, right? They do not know what critical race theory is, just like they don't know what woke means.
Right.
You know, like they hear these buzzwords and they've decided to be against it because Ron DeSantis is against it. So clearly we should be against it, right? No, but Moms for Liberty is very weird because they actually got started as anti-mask mandate moms.
Okay.
They didn't want children to be required to mask during the COVID pandemic in schools. And it's really just like these two women that started it. And one of them had recently lost a school board election. Like she had a sitting seat on a school board and lost her seat and then formed Moms for Liberty with a couple of other local parents. And it ballooned very quickly. Like they found it in 2021. This Krause list also was in 2021. And it clearly did not take very long for them to kind of find each other and start having the same agenda. Now, like Moms for Liberty's underlying concept, this thing that they have, like this t-shirts and this slogan that they use, is they don't want to co-parent with the government. Like it should be their decision what their child reads. It should be their decision whether or not their child wears a mask, etc. Whereas, of course, you look at what the goal of public education is, what school education is, and it's public health, civil health. And it's like, well, why should you as a parent opt your child out of learning about the world around them? But that is your prerogative as a parent, of course. The main issue that you get with the Moms for Liberty stuff, they put a big smoke screen and shout and scream that school librarians are pedophiles for giving books about queer identity. Well, not even giving, just having access to books about queer identity in the school library, because they don't want you to look at the fact that they want to decide what your child should read, not their child, your child. And that's, I think, an interesting point to raise.
Now, the Krause lists, so there wasn't a specific mandate of what librarians were supposed to do with, just say that they have these books, or
identify how many copies of each book in the attached addendum your district possesses and at what campus locations. Identify the amount of funds spent by your district, and identify any other books or content in your district that address or contain this list of topics that you provided. And I'm just like, number one, graphic presentations of sexual behavior that is in violation of the law. And I'm like, how would an illegal book wind up in a school library? And those aren't available.
I think that's a very badly worded way of saying we don't want books with sodomy.
Well,
because I think that's what he's trying to say. Not books that are against the law, but that have actions that are
Well,
against
he
the
also
law.
says we can't have books in the school library that discuss HIV or AIDS
Right.
at all.
Right.
Like, not even to say what it is, apparently.
Now, did his list include things like menstruation and topics like that?
I have the book list, but of course I did not go through and look up all of these books to see what they were about. Like, some of them are novels, some of them aren't. You know, some of them are nonfiction books. One of the ones mentioned in this article I mentioned from Book Riot, it asks to have listed this book called It's Perfectly Normal, which is apparently a very classic sex education book for teens. Anything mentioning teen pregnancy, including YA novels. Supposedly about 5% of the books on this list are about pregnancy in some way. And there's plenty of books that are on this list that just wouldn't really be in a school library. Tim Krause wanted to know if libraries had a book called The Reproductive System, which was published in 1971.
Okay.
You know, like, obviously they would have more modern and up-to-date books on this topic rather than this one.
Well, it depends on the school system, I think. You never know. I don't know how up to date they keep
it. And this is why the journalist was saying that they think this is just this keyword search that he didn't really think very much about, because he also wants to know if they have books that are warning teenagers about the dangers of having sex or teaching abstinence. Like, he doesn't want them to have this book about abstinence, apparently.
But going back to, you said earlier, specifically books about illegal sex acts or something?
Well,
was that how it was?
Yeah. His phrase was graphic presentations of sexual behavior that is in violation of the law.
Because, so sexual behavior that's in violation of the law would be...
That would be child sexual abuse
material. Right. Exactly. Right. Between a minor and an adult.
Right. Well, I don't think that it is required for an adult to be depicted, but it is a visual depiction of a minor in a sexually abusive or exploitative situation.
Because, so then if graphic here means visual, that's also something different, because I was thinking about some classic examples. Lolita. Very well-read book, very popular. But obviously, it also talks about a minor being
in a sexual relationship with an adult.
Yeah, but that's not a book you would have in an elementary school library anyway, because that's not the reading age of kids 10, 12, and under. But if it's
maybe is a book that could be discussed by older teens in a literature class, like. But honestly, and here's where it gets really weird, right? Like, we were talking about this really specific language, and he got it from this update to the education code. They were talking about what is required curriculum in the classroom. It had nothing to do with what books are stocked in the school library. He decided to do this overreach thing with being like, if they have access to these books at all. And he didn't say you have to remove them from the library. He said, I want to know if you have them.
Right. Yeah.
Like, and it just really, really ballooned out of control. And I think the reason it became so out of control so quickly is because of Moms for Liberty digging in on it. They needed something to do when mask mandates weren't a big deal anymore.
Right. All right.
But yeah, and then with, what's in violation of the law. I mean, pornography, let's say, is in violation of the law, but like, there's no actual clear definition of what pornography is.
Sure.
Right?
I mean, it was kind of open. I think there was a Supreme Court case that had a definition, but I don't remember exactly what that came out of that. But it wasn't, it was very like more things that people thought this should be pornography were not then considered pornography. And I think that comes down to, it's very complicated to define some of these things.
Yes. Well, and like, let's not lose sight of what we're really talking about. We're mostly going to be talking about books that are just YA novels that happen to have a gay character in them, or happen to have a Black character in them, or happen to have a Black gay character in them. You know, they're not depicting sexually explicit content. They just happen to be about a gay character or have a gay side character, anything to do with that. And Moms for Liberty jumps in and says, no, we don't want our child reading that. It's exactly what you were saying, Erin. It's not a specific book that they have a problem with. It is themes in a book at all.
Right. And well, I think one thing I'd be curious is how then do we get from this to, you know, I think the traditional view of who a librarian is in America is something very specific. You know, the person who you could always trust, who knew everything about everything, who's always there, who can recommend books, that can help you with, you know, any kind of information you need for research, who can do these things, to being some kind of horrible villain in our schools. When you think of, you know, to me, the idea of the librarian has always been one of the least harmful people on earth.
I think you have a very positive spin. There are some negative stereotypes about librarians.
I'm sure. But I mean, as far as like, even to me, what I think of as negative, oh, they're cranky and they're old and they don't get married or whatever, but they're still like the holders of information. They're still the people who kind of curate and help us with information. And to me, it's like getting, you know, and that is what was really alarming about the documentary is suddenly these people are completely demonized.
Yeah. Well, and I think now is a great time to ask Erin, like, you know, somebody is working at a library. They're choosing books for the library. What is their education like that helps them do that? Like, how are they making those choices? What's their goal?
So librarians, so there are different people working at a library, first of all. If you have the title librarian, you have to have a degree from a school that's certified by the American Library Association. Also, that would now be a master's degree. And when you're making choices on books, you're looking at several different areas. You're looking at publications like Publishers Weekly or Library Journal, which are recommending titles for certain user groups or based on popularity, because you're trying to find something for everybody in your community, or something for all of your users, which then again is different for a school library versus a public library. A public library serves adults and children, whereas a school library would serve more children or their educators. So you're looking at publications that help you make these choices, or you're also letting the users choose the books themselves. So somebody might have heard about a book from a friend or seen it in a magazine. They come to you and they say, do you have this title? It's by a YouTube person that I love to watch, and now they've come out with a book. And the librarian would say, no, we don't have it, but we can order it for you. Or they do have it and they pair the user with their book choice. Or the librarian themselves just is looking at other libraries for books. And there are lots of ways to select books, but you're definitely going based on who your users are. And most libraries also have a selection policy. And I think this is also an area where the book challenges and book bans, especially with this Krause list, would maybe have more of an impact, is because they could help alter the selection policy and in that way affect which new books come in. Because if you're saying the selection policy says no books about race, well, now I have a general ban on finding new materials with books about race, rather than saying, no, I want to challenge this specific book because it uses inappropriate, outdated terminology It's no longer educational at a level that a child would understand. More like a university researcher could then use this material and put it in an appropriate context. If you're giving it to a child out of context, it's confusing.
A librarian is getting a lot of the same challenges. That would be a reason to update the selection policy, right? Like,
maybe not, because maybe you really do just need to go book by book and say which books need to come out of the library. But again, it's different, public library versus a school library. I'm not exactly sure what the hiring process for a school librarian is. Most school librarians will also have a master's degree in library and information science and a master's in education, or at least some sort of teaching degree, because they have a very, again, specific user group. Whereas a public library might only have the master's in library and information science. And a public librarian can be hired and fired, the head librarian, the director at least, by the board of trustees of the library, which are like elected positions, as far as I understand.
which is actually the same with school libraries, because the school board controls whether or not a librarian works there, right? They fired the school librarians. We saw that a few times in the documentary of librarians who had been fired for asking why a book had been banned in their school district.
So then it would be
going back and forth with the school board.
Okay, so then it would be similar to public libraries. And then if you have control over who is in the position, you then can influence what they say about the selection policy, which then affects what books are allowed in the library en masse, as opposed to, one-on-one.
So selection policies are generally individual to each district, or like in public libraries, they're...
Exactly.
Okay, so there's not a general American Library Association.
So the American Library Association does give advice on what should go into a selection policy, but hopefully you would tailor it to the people who are actually using your library.
Okay.
And then also going back to school libraries, are these all public schools? I think they were all public schools in the documentary, but you have
when it comes to a private school, you don't have to do these crazy, we all have to go to the school board meeting and yell at each other stuff, because it happens in a much more controlled environment. And you're not talking about, all of these hands touching things. They're a little more contained, I think, within private schools. I mean, of course, private schools also, if they're an accredited school, they still have things that they have to teach the students.
Sure.
But I think they have a little more leeway with what they're doing in their library if they have one.
I think it makes it kind of obvious, though, that maybe some people, or in this documentary, it kind of gave me the idea that people think that librarians are just in school libraries picking whatever.
Yeah, there's this idea that they're just doing whatever they want, that they have no oversight, that they have no policy.
Right, but there is a clear policy that they're following, and they have the education behind it. They have organizations behind it. They, will have a selection policy. They'll have a list of books from where they order and what they can do. And and I think that this, it's the people that are contesting a lot of books seem to think that it's just librarians just going riot on whatever they think. Well, and that it can't quite happen that way, it looks like.
Moms for Liberty obviously is kind of spearheading a lot of this, and they have a really, really specific agenda. They're not shy about it, I think. I have spent some time on their website, and they have said stuff like teachers' unions are terrorists and cartels. They've said sexual education in schools has, quote, the intentional goal to sexualize children, destabilize the family, and deconstruct Western society, end quote. I found this handbook that they have, the CSE Smart Book, And CSE refers to comprehensive sexuality education. But I think they kind of made this term up. I poked around a little bit, and they're not talking about a specific curriculum of any kind. They just have decided that all public schools in America have a comprehensive sexual education policy that is informed by Marxism and humanism. It's xenophobic, like they're very anti recommendations from the WHO and UNICEF, you know, as far as what kind of level of sexual education certain age groups should have. And they're very vocally a Christian organization who believe that the Christian God sets the morality and clarity around what sexual education should look like in schools and what people should be doing with their lives. And they have a very demonstrated through, you know, the work that they do, goal of making it so that everyone is required to adhere to their moral standards as Christians. It's really kind of draconian to me. They don't want to co-parent with the government, but they are requiring other parents to co-parent with them.
Right.
You know, and I just think they're not willing to engage with that idea because they know best. You know, clearly we should listen to them because they're saving this country from itself. These horrible Marxists.
But I mean, again, I think we're dealing with more because, I mean, I think the US had been in this kind of place before, but studies showed that once there was more sex education and information about sexuality, that there were fewer teen pregnancies, there were fewer problems because young people actually learned about things. And I mean, this is, I think, undisputed evidence that has come out since there was more education for a while. And it just seems like, you know, we have a situation where it's more about controlling information than it is about helping kids in their morality or any of these, you know, things that seem to be what they're trying to claim is the issue.
And I feel like, you know, they say that they have this very Christian morality, that they want to impose these standards, but not all Christians would want what Moms for Liberty say. They were like either. It's really misunderstanding, I feel like, the role of education, right? Teaching teens how to avoid sexually transmitted diseases and pregnancy is not saying, okay, now go have sex. It's saying, now you're prepared and understand when you are ready to have sex, which may be at any time. You know, I'm not going to prescribe, you know, and we're talking about these American standards. The age of consent is not the same everywhere. So when is a teen old enough to make that decision? Not everyone agrees on. And so it's just like they've made this decision for everyone without really interrogating it in any kind of intellectual way. And to me, the whole thing smacks of anti-intellectuals. Like that has been a huge problem in the U.S. in, I don't know,
Well,
for a while.
forever. I mean, I think it started that, you know, once people start to understand my situation doesn't have to be this way, there's information out there, but that ends up being a threat to this kind of ideology.
And just talking about the availability of information. So the role of the librarian is to make this information available and accessible, but the librarian doesn't necessarily agree with the information or recommend it.
Have they even read all of the books in their library? No.
Right, probably not, unless they have a lot of time on their hands. And so some librarians are also devout Christians with very...
one of the librarians in the documentary was a Baptist minister's wife.
Yes, exactly. And actually, I remember an anecdote that one of my library science teachers always shared about a former student of his who was a devout Catholic, and she was really worried about being a librarian in a library that had books on abortion, because she was really against this. And he just told her to find a library that would support her ideas, and that she needed to find a way to separate herself as well from sharing information versus sharing her own views.
Right.
And she wrote him a couple years later saying that she had found a position in a Catholic private school, and this suited her needs. And yes, because librarians are also people and they also have views. And it's just like the parents can't make decisions for other people's kids, only for their own kids. Librarians are also not really supposed to make decisions for people. They're just making information that is generally popular or recommended available for all their patrons.
I mean, how hard would it really be to set up a database in school libraries where parents can opt their kids out of checking out certain books? Sure. If the kid tries to check out that book, the librarian has to say, sorry, you don't have permission. Whereas another kid doesn't have that flag on their account or is allowed to.
Yeah.
Then you're actually giving parental rights.
Right. And I think actually in the documentary, they one of the books that was challenged, the librarian reviewed it and said, you know what, I can see where you're coming from, parent. I'm going to remove it from the children's section and put it in the teen section. Because kids have a very wide need base from age 5 to age 17. And something, I have a 3-year-old. There are many books that I would not want to read with her just because I cannot explain it in a way that would make sense for her. And it could be scary. I mean, we could talk about just books like with a demon image or something in it that would be scary for her.
You also don't want your 3-year-old to read Goosebumps, right?
Exactly. Because kids' books are also arranged differently. They're often arranged with the cover facing out so that you can quickly peruse them as a child, because you're not going to see the whole image from the spine, but you're also probably at different stages of literacy. So if you're 5, maybe you can't read yet, but I can see on the cover that this book is about Winnie the Pooh, and I like bears, and I like Winnie the Pooh, so I'm going to take that one. So I would maybe arrange a book like this differently. I would arrange it where the spine is facing out and it's higher up and it's organized on the shelf in a certain way, because that's already making the access to different user groups more targeted.
Right. But I think it also kind of illustrates how important it is that parents are involved in what their kids are reading.
Sure.
And have an open conversation of, like, if you read something that upsets you, that you don't understand, that you need to talk about, but just be aware. I think in the documentary, it's kind of this thing, well, any kid can just check out anything and we'd have no idea. It's like, well, parent then. You know, be a parent. I mean, I think there's very few things when I was quite young that my parents didn't know what I was had access to. You know, you don't give your 8-year-old absolute privacy and everything. And I think, you know, that's another issue that needs to be addressed here is, if you're a parent, be involved in what your kids read or don't read, and talk to them. If you don't want them reading something, have an honest discussion with them about it. Don't just say, there's a list at the library, you're not allowed any of these, because that's not helpful for children.
But then you're leaving aside, you know, what did we see in the documentary? We saw this parent who was really involved in the school book ban system. She didn't want children to have access to a lot of things. She was also completely estranged and no contact with her adult son, who identified as gay, who was also at the same school board meeting to talk about how access to books that, you know, let him know that gay was a thing he could be and that was okay, you know, kind of saved his life. Please don't take those books out of schools. Here, as kids need those. And it became very obvious that this woman's agenda, you know, the reason she thinks that school librarians are all groomers is because at some point her son read a book that said, if you're gay, you will find love and acceptance in your life, and gave him some hope for the future. And then she couldn't control the fact that he was gay anymore. that's not something a parent can control. Parents do not always agree with their children, you know, and at some point in that child's education path and, you know, growing towards being an adult, they do need to have access to books that validate their identity.
Sure.
And you have plenty of children who are experiencing racism out on the street. They are experiencing racism. And if you deny them access to books that tell them what that is and why it's happening to them, what are they supposed to think?
And one of the comments that the son made during this meeting was that they read the Bible from cover to cover at home, and that there are instances in the Bible where they talk about sexual intercourse and rape, and then the mom,
all kinds of shit.
exactly. And then the mom comes up and she makes it very clear that what her problem is not that sex is addressed, but the language, which then goes back to, but you can't ban content in general, just saying any instance of sex, but you are talking about, no, we're talking about specific language that's inappropriate for certain ages to use or read. Different ages should have
Different access.
different access.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree with that. Like, you don't give the same book to your 8-year-old that you give to your 18-year-old.
No. Right.
Sure. But an 18-year-old should be allowed to choose any book they want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because they are an adult.
Right. And also what's been mentioned a few times, the librarian is not just putting anything in the library. The librarian is following certain selection criteria based on the needs of the user group. So if the user group is doing a biology report on the human body, would be nice to have a few books about the human body available in the library.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I thought was just really wild when it comes to the Krause list and kind of the agenda that a lot of the book banning groups have. You know, they're like, oh, they're all pedophiles. Oh, they're all groomers. You know, oh, they're giving porn to children. And I'm like, it's not that. Those books aren't available to put in the library because of the fact that they're illegal. Sure. You can't make the books. Or, you know, if you do make the books, they get seized by the government. They're definitely not in school libraries.
Right.
The fact that your personal morality disagrees with a piece of literature does not make it pornography.
Right.
And yeah, and that's one of the things that I think really drove me crazy as I've looked into like what book banning is all about. As we watch this documentary, it just becomes so clear. And we are, you know, having this a lot of conversation about it. It's just homophobia in society. We have not really progressed beyond where we were 30 years ago in a lot of ways. You know, like, okay, we made it, you know, legal for same-sex couples to get married in America in what, 2014? Not very long ago, but people still don't actually agree that it's an okay thing to be or do.
Right.
Plenty of people don't, and they have decided that if we make sure the 10-year-olds don't know about it, they won't turn out to be gay. And I'm like, well, I don't think you understand what being gay is.
Right. It doesn't work that way.
Well, and this idea that somebody is a groomer because they allowed access to a book that has a gay character in it is like, it's so homophobic. It's so taking the entire experience of being a queer person or having a queer identity and making it just about sex acts.
Right. Well, and I'm not sure that being a groomer or the term groomer only applies to something sexual. I think it can apply to religious things.
Well, now you're talking about cults, which you want to groom someone into a cult. But they specifically mean this adult is teaching my child to have sex so that they can have sex with them.
But I'm just saying, you know, what about the parent who's not Christian, who doesn't want their kid to be groomed for religious studies and religious things? You know, I feel like
that's why the Rise for Liberty conversation is so weird. And like, I wish that this was what we were actually talking about, as opposed to like, oh, what if we ban this book, or what if we don't ban this book? It's like, look at what they actually want, what their actual clear goal is. They are making sure their own chapter members are becoming members of the school board. really supporting them for elections, it's because they want to decide what everybody's children are doing, not only their own. Like, that's, I think, the issue here. It's not a specific book or not. It's not about what's in the school libraries. It's about what they regressive conservative policies that are behind their agenda and then they want to force on other parents.
And I think, we don't have time to get into it in this episode, but we're going to talk more about new bills that are trying to restrict access in libraries in another episode. But
not even in public libraries, right?
Right.
Not just school libraries.
And I think, this idea of the villain, and we have the Red Scare in America, and we have moral panics, and it's still, to me, these are still looping around communism or Marxism or these things that have constantly been. But then if you look at Victorian England, we did have the push against homosexuality and a lot of problems there. So I think these things that society has to set up some kind of other that is immoral, that is dangerous, that has some other kind of aspect. So I think that Moms for Liberty and Krause and people like this are trying to set up these kind of enemies that people will not think about who they are or what it really is, but just get afraid because, I have kids, I'm afraid. But you've got to pay attention. So I think it plays along with Red Scare, moral panic, all these things that have kind of happened in the U.S. history of,
Do you think book banning is a moral panic?
It is for sure a moral panic, the way especially how they're setting it up today, with really the language of the pedophile, the groomer, these kinds of things.
I mean, that's a conversational bomb. We're drop that word into a conversation and the conversation is over.
Right.
You can't defend against that without making yourself look really bad, right?
But at the same time, it's also libelous.
Yeah.
That people, you really can't say these things about someone else. And it's just, I guess, lucky that people don't go to court over it, because these are very dangerous words to say about people.
No. Well, and this is where I would like to state for the record that the sexual abuse of a child is heinously wrong.
Yes.
And what we're trying to do is distinguish giving a kid access to a book with a gay character in it is not meeting that standard. And I feel like I've seen it happening in the last few years that some of these words have just been tossed around to the point that they've lost all meaning.
Right. Right. And I think, that was the one thing I noticed in the documentary is a lot of these parents who were out for banning books would say things like, it's child pornography, when they mean we think there's pornography that children have access to. And so, they don't even have a commodification of what this language means and what their words mean. They're just
using incendiary
right,
for rhetorical purposes.
Right.
And Moms for Liberty, they are so organized, so persuasive. They build their network and they get people to promote their agenda without understanding really the nuances or the actual details of the agenda. And I thought one character in the documentary that was extremely interesting was this woman, I can't remember her name unfortunately, who then went ahead, she was on the Moms for Liberty agenda, and then she did some more research and realized that she disagreed with them.
She ran for school board,
right?
Yeah, had a school board position. Yes. It's like, okay, now I can really dig in and find out what's going on in these school libraries.
Yes.
And found out everything was actually fine.
Right.
She's like, oh, just kidding, guys, it's actually fine in there.
Right.
There's nothing scary happening. We can all calm down. And was so vilified. I think this was the woman who had to have her brother sleeping on the porch.
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, she definitely is no longer on the school board. They removed her.
Right.
But those are the kind of people that we really need, right? The people who say, okay, let me challenge my own beliefs.
Right.
Let me take a step back
Right.
and review.
Right. Exactly. And I think that's what we don't have anymore. And I think it's also become harder to do this kind of research from the standpoint of what's out there and how do you discern between the right information and information that's just put out there because of, being extreme about something. So I think it's really hard for people to discern, but yeah, do your own research, talk to your kids yourself, have this kind of relationship, and I'm not blaming parents, but parenting is a much bigger thing than going to a school board and banning books because you're afraid your kid's going to have sex if they read about sex. It's like, kids are going to have sex. If you teach them about sex, they're probably less likely to have sex. Because you tell them more about this can happen and this can happen, at least they're aware, at least they're informed. Kids are going to do things, whether they know about them or not.
Sure. And going back to information in the trustworthy librarian, if you're looking for information, a person you can ask is your local librarian, whether in the public library or a public school library. If you say, I want to know if you have books on this topic that specifically use this language or depict visually these kinds of scenes, the librarian can probably get you a list very quickly. And there you go. Then you know.
Right.
But you just have to ask. You can't keep challenging without having the information first.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think, what made Moms for Liberty such a big deal was like this whole thing where they would put together these packets of information about different books. Like, here's all the information you would need to challenge it in your district. Or like, here's the quotes that you can use to
Sure.
Like, you no longer have to do that yourself. They've done it for you.
Right.
And I'm like, no, I think you should do it yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
I think you should go look
Yeah.
and see in its context whether this is a big deal or not.
Right.
Yeah.
This is like, this is going to sound really silly, but it's like what happened with Harry Potter. All of these parents freaked out because he was teaching children witchcraft and Satan worship or whatever. And then they read the book and they're like, oh,
yeah,
right. Oh, it's actually fine.
Yeah. Right.
So when I was in middle school, my friend and I, we were really into witches and we really wanted to be witches. So we went to the library and we checked out a bunch of books on witches. And we ended up returning them because they were pretty scary, because they were for a particular type of witch that does worship demons and the devil, and they had like weird spells in them. Yes, they were a little bit too
Yes, okay.
too one directional from us. We were thinking of something a little bit lighter, but those were not in the children's section.
Did you need massive amounts of therapy about it? Are you scarred for
No,
life
I have
because
not.
you accessed this book?
And so I was able to check it out, but I was also able to say, this is not the book I was looking for, and return it.
Right.
Absolutely no problem.
When I was 12, I read so many romance novels that were not for children, and you know what? I'm okay.
You're okay.
I'm pretty okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I read a lot of Agatha Christie when I was like 10,
And you somehow managed to not commit murder.
I don't know. I'm not a murderer. So, what do you know? I have learned deductive reasoning though from it. So, hey.
Here's the thing is books are a very individual thing, right?
Sure.
You read one and your response to it is extremely individual.
Yeah.
You can never predict or decide for someone else what they're getting out of a piece of literature. It's the reason why it's an art form, right? So saying that, kids can only access these certain books because they will learn these very specific things from them and nothing else is like, are you sure? Why do you think it's important for people to talk about this, think about this? None of us are in the US. Why is this a big deal? I don't have kids. Do I need to care about this? I think, well, for one thing, it's not staying contained.
Right.
Book challenges are happening in Germany now too. They're soon in other countries. And there's also this very weird conservative sweep across Europe that's happening. A lot of countries were really rocked by what happened in their elections in the last few years. And I'm like, you know, some of this stuff starts in the US, but it doesn't stay there. And I feel like knowing where some of this stuff comes from can be really important. I don't know. What do you guys think?
It kind of reminds me maybe of case law, which my understanding is that you have one specific case, a decision is made on that case, and then it's used to determine the outcomes of other cases because they're all just referring to this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Precedent. That's what I'm looking for. I think what is really dangerous is that if a book is challenged and successfully banned in one library, or at least removed from that one library, you're setting this tricky precedent for other libraries and other communities and other schools, because they will, similar to case law, start banning them just because it was banned elsewhere, and not doing this thorough research and saying, okay, what is our specific user group? How has this been used in the classroom? Because maybe a teacher has requested a book to be added to the library, and they have a very specific class program that is using this book, and they're putting into context whatever tricky page that is usually challenged. And all of the parents are fine with it, but because it was banned in this community on the other side of Texas, now it's being challenged in this other local community, just because
flattens the concept of a local community with its own needs and says, no, we're all actually the same.
Right. Which then leads us into a society where information all comes from one source, and whether or not it's true or not doesn't matter. We just accept it.
Yeah. Historically, it's always been a good idea.
Right. I mean, it's a fabulous thing. But I think if we are concerned about our young people, then we should be concerned that they still can have access to information, that they can learn about things like their own sexuality, about racism, about misogyny, about any of these things, about what's happened in history and what's actually happened. And I do believe there's a way to understand things without feeling guilt. This is the point. Why does it have to be guilt? Does this person feel guilt about it? Is that why they're talking about it? We don't have to learn it in a way that makes us feel guilty. We just have to understand what happens and try to take steps to not let the same things happen again.
And are you talking now specifically about race?
Well, race or anything that happens. I mean, I think, it's a lot about, they talk about white guilt so much now. And I'm like, okay, I feel terrible about slavery. Yeah. I don't blame myself.
No.
I don't blame being white on it. I think it's a terrible thing. And I think we need to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. How do you make sure something doesn't happen again? By knowing how it happened in the first place.
Right. And I think seems to be a big push in trying to avoid that. Why? Because maybe they're trying to make things happen again. They're trying to get absolute power over people.
I don't think anybody's advocating for the return of slavery, but they do want to stop people from having conversations about lingering inequalities, because that's too complicated and nuanced for everyone, and it might cost some money if we admitted that there was an inequality,
right?
Right. And it's just like these people who are now so like they're anti-DEI. We can't have this DEI crap, and I'm like, we can't have diversity,
right?
That's it. You don't like diversity? Diversity is bad? Okay, like. Right. I guess we're saying that out loud now. Yes. Cool. Yeah. So one of the things that I think we do want to talk about is this ongoing retrying to set new precedents about book banning, about censorship, about what's considered literature and what's considered trash, Right. And we do want to do another episode about that kind of focuses on this bill that is coming before the Senate soon. So join us next time for that. Yes. We all need to go do a bunch of research.
Or maybe next time we'll discuss a book And then the next time we'll get into serious.
Maybe.
Okay, well, I guess that should be enough for today. I have a very smiley baby looking at me, so I'm quite distracted now. But thank you, Erin, for joining us and giving us your insight on how librarianship works.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely discussing this with you.
Okay, well, we'll see you next time.